So good morning, Emma. Thank you so much for joining me. You are a very important person in the eyes of people like me because what you do within the world of City and Guilds actually has a direct effect on what I'm able to do as an educator, and ultimately what we're able to offer to our learners. So I know that is not all in your hands, but so a certain amount is. So first of all, would you like to introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? And what's your role?
Thanks, Louise. Good morning, everyone. So my name's Emma Mackay and I'm the industry manager here at City and Guilds. So ultimately, I'm responsible for all that is hair, beauty, retail and creative. So I come from, first off, actually a beauty therapy background. So beauty and spa therapy, working in different salons, managing different salons, then had my own salons. Then moved into education over the years. I was there for about 15 years, so a good 13 years managing in a large FE college, so managing hair, beauty, media makeup, and some sort of business studies and bits and pieces as well. And also alongside that, did some teacher training and sort of roles, some observation bits and pieces. So I joined City and Guilds about 5.5 years ago. City and Guilds were our awarding organisation of choice, so we use them across hair, beauty provision. Started as a consultant, so subject matter expert, and had a great time writing, the exam papers, did some international projects and things, and then joined within a similar remit to what I do now, so managing and looking after all that is hair, beauty, as I say, retail and creative. So my role at City and Guilds is very much about strategic direction, business planning, and I spend a great deal of time looking after and managing employer stakeholder relationships. So I serve a purpose on all sort of regulatory bodies, voicing, championing the concerns, the views of the hair and beauty industry, whether it be via steering groups, regulator groups with Ofqual, the Institute for sort of Apprenticeships and Education, these sorts of things as well, to try and piece together what's happening in industry, what's happening in education with education reforms or funding reforms, different types of provision, to try and marry those together to provide ultimately qualifications and training for people coming into our wonderful industries.
Fabulous. I can't believe you said it's only 5 years. It feels like
5.5 years. Yeah, I know.
But I think a lot of people think that qualifications just are created like this overnight. But of course, one of the problems that we've got is that the industry is very much led by product and by technique. And by the time that education then goes through all the processes that it has to go through, and of course we are governed by funding at the end of the day, that's what drives everything, like and so there's a lot of processes, and over the years we've ended up with lots of different types of qualifications. And I think what I wanted to really get out of today is for people to understand the product, why it was developed, who it's for, and the different assessment techniques. Because what I'm trying to do is to give people options that actually they could potentially offer a regulated qualification, but they need to know which is the right one for them. And of course, there are the endorsements as well, so that's like another separate thing, and the digital badging and all sorts of things, which is very exciting. And I'm working with somebody at the moment to try and bring a accreditation through the digital badging. So when I looked back at qualifications, now this is probably way before your time, Emma, but when I did my training, and when a lot of people in this group did their training, there was just one option. You went to college, you did your 3 years City and Guilds hair and beauty combined course, that was it, you had no choice. And then slowly the qualification was chopped up, so you then chose hair or beauty. And then in about, and I think it was somewhere around the 1994 mark, I seem to remember I was pregnant with my oldest at the time, so that was 94, this thing called MVQs came on board. So it completely changed the landscape of education and training. And I know from an external verifier I was at the time, I spent my whole time educating people on changing their qualification assessment process and understanding what this assessment was all about. And of course, it was all going on in FE colleges, which it probably shouldn't have done because it was supposed to be an industry-led thing. So first of all, Emma, can you tell a little bit about what is the NVQ and who it's for and how it's supposed to be assessed? And is it still available for use at the moment?
Oh, there's a lot of questions. So yes, I did my geeky research this morning just to check, like you say, the date that we first started doing this, and it was 1986. The very first MVQ came to the party. Whether that was in hair and beauty or not, Louise, I didn't dig that deep.
I think it was hairdressing, actually, because it was Alan, wasn't it, who started the process through the hairdressing training board. He brought the MVQs on board with hair. I think it was a bit later for beauty, but yeah.
Yeah, and it was actually City and Guilds who developed the first MVQs in hairdressing as part of a bigger piece of work. I'm working on something else around that. So that was really interesting to hear as well. That, and I know myself historically, you know, hairdressing, you know, has been that work-based learning kind of that vibe really in the industry. So the introduction of the MVQ was very much brought around for work-based skills. So there was a real shift in trying to take learners who are looking for vocational, industry-related, work-related study from the standard college type environment, so Monday to Friday, you know, the learning within a particular centre. And the purpose of the MVQ primarily was to be used as part of a work-based learning framework. So when we had these frameworks, the MVQ formed part of that. And it really was about competency, the competency-based qualifications. So you're still, and those people that are familiar with them now, be familiar with the basis of the assessment strategy, which is very much around pass or fail, competency-based. So you learn, you know, your knowledge and understanding elements are undertaken, and you learn your practical skills. Ultimately and primarily should have been on the job, you know, whilst working in the salon, and then the college or the provider would pick up the gaps, you know, the theory, the underpinning knowledge, the possibly so some of the practical if it wasn't covered in the workplace. So when they first of all came about, the sole purpose was to be used as work-based learning, but we quickly saw that FE colleges in particular were able to use them also as part of full-time learning, so the average sort of academic year type learning. So we already started to see, yes, the work-based learning style of the MVQ being used, but they were also picked up by further education colleges as well to be able to be used, to be able to introduce vocational types of learning for people who weren't necessarily ready at that point to work in industry at that particular starting point.
So would it be fair to say that if we had salon owners who were particularly concerned about a poor level of training that was going on in an area, that is something that a salon could pick up and actually become a work-based provider for sort of growing your own therapist, really?
Yeah, I mean, obviously things have shifted fundamentally. So now we don't have frameworks anymore. So the apprenticeship framework has moved to apprenticeship standards. Now, I'm not sure if you want to pick that up yet, Louise.
Not just yet, not just yet.
Okay.
So let's just say, for instance, I wanted to offer a young person an MVQ,
Yes.
or an older person an MVQ, and I wasn't really worried about funding because they were going to fund it themselves, so it was privately. Are those standards with City and Standards, as in a qualification, is it still available? Could I do that? Could I apply for approval and I could have a young person or an old person in my salon and I could teach them and assess them and
For
get
an MVQ. Yes,
Right.
so the NVQs are still available. Obviously, they are very dated types of qualification now, and we're going to move through, I think, as we chat this morning, all the other types of qualification that have come to the party. So the MVQs are, the majority of them are still available, and they remain to be quite popular still. They are popular now within a further education type establishment, because we've now moved for the apprenticeship market to be using something called standards, which I think we're going to discuss later on this morning. Obviously, the NVQs, when they first of all came about, were based on something called National Occupational Standards. So the NOS, I think lots of your followers and listeners will be familiar with. So really, they were very much a case of almost like a lift and shift. So we would look at the National Occupational Standard and we would form them into a qualification. Where education has evolved and changed over the years, we now have to, with the introduction of technical qualifications and T-levels and things again that we will discuss, we have a great deal of emphasis on industry now. So as well as looking at the National Occupational Standards, well, what does industry want? What are employers telling us are important in qualifications? So whilst they are still available, they're not the most current and not the most up to date. in terms of everything else we're going to discuss as well.
I'm thinking that from a salon owner who is wanting to grow their own therapist or hairdresser, they are a qualification that they could be put through, and they could increase the training. They don't have to stick within that. They can create a program that's even bigger. So that's great. So then we had, moving on from there, we had the RQF, didn't we, that was developed in, I don't know when that was either. I don't know whether you've got the date.
I haven't got that far of the dates.
What that did, I think, well, it was definitely post 1994 because I was well established in what I was doing. So I'm thinking it was around about the 2002 mark, something around there. But that was looking at the NVQs and saying, well, hang on a minute, they're not suitable for every type of learner, particularly the adult market or the small or the short course provision that was generally, what's the term you use, self-funded?
Like full cost recovery.
Full cost recovery, that's the word I was looking for. And so certainly within hair and beauty, we then had something that was a VRQ that was created. So a VRQ is not a national vocational qualification, it's a vocational related qualification. So can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, now the VRQ, so they're vocationally recognised qualifications to date for hair and beauty, as I sit here in my home office, they actually still remain to be our largest suite of qualifications in terms of learner volumes and revenue and everything that comes together with it in their use, and is absolutely in line with what you've just said, Louise. So the VRQ qualifications enabled us to be more creative with how we could package them and what we could do with them. For City and Guilds, this is when we start to think outside the box as well, when we evolved. So rather than having something that was competency based, pass or fail, unit by unit, something that was primarily set about to be used in the workplace, we developed something in the sense of the VRQ that could be used by many, many different players in the market, but also would be able to distinguish the different levels and types of learner that were studying them. So, for instance, an NVQ qualification, every learner within a cohort of level 2 therapists would come out with a pass or a fail for an NVQ level 2 in beauty. For a VRQ qualification for City and Guilds, we actually grade each and every unit, pass, merit or distinction. So I know myself, when I was managing in a further education college, this really excited me because actually it gave me flexibility, firstly, to be able to really widen the participation and the offer that I could have for this type of qualification, in that came in lots of different sizes. So as you said, Louise, you could just do a unit, you could do an award, a certificate or a diploma, depending on the duration of the course. So yes, it depended a lot on what types of funding you wanted to draw down, but I was able to use them in college for short courses, in Indian head massage, for example, or I might just do a Saturday workshop for 6 weeks on waxing or whatever it might be. So that excited me, the flexibility of what I could offer people. And I think people started to really change over the last sort of 15 years or so in their mode of study as well. Not everybody wanted to come to college or to a PTP September to June. You know, people wanted to study in the evenings. They wanted to also not necessarily completely retrain. So we saw a lot of people from many, many varied industries wanting to do something extra. So they had an interest in body massage, or they had an interest in reflexology. So alongside their usual day job, they would come to us, in the evenings and the weekends. So the VRQ enabled us to have that flexibility. The second thing that really excited me, as I said, was the grading. So for me, being a teacher for sort of 15 years, within every group of students, you've got those that are outstanding, that really do apply themselves, really do excel, and those who are competent and pass, and that is their threshold, and that is their level, and that's still an amazing achievement. But being able to award and provide that stretch and challenge within a group really was something quite special with the VRQs. And still to this date, we receive much feedback around those learners that really strive to be outstanding, receive the distinctions and things like that as well. So yeah, they do remain, because of the flexibility, because of the sizing differences, because of the grading opportunities, they do remain to be very, very popular still.
I think we were the only awarding body at the time to actually give that past merit and distinction.
That's it.
I think BTCT have changed now, but at the
Mm.
time they were, and I think I remember they were called progressional awards as well, weren't they? When
Yeah.
before they were the VRQ, and I was very blessed to have been on the writing team of some of those to start.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Kathy O'Shaughnessy, that's when I first met Kathy actually.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And we use them a lot now for people that actually want progression. So they actually want to get to a level 4 in skincare, but they actually need a pathway. They don't want to do waxing. They don't want to do anything else. So we can put them through the level 2 skincare, the level 3 electrotherapy, and they can take some of the level 4 units as well before they go off and do their technical stuff as well. So really, really useful. So that's great. So they need to remain, Emma.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, isn't it? Because we're constantly asked, will these be around forever? Will you keep extending them? So as long as they're being used, the volumes are there. Because what we have to seriously look at is, you know, it would be, and I think sort of 15, 20 years ago, we were like kids in a sweet shop. We used to be able to just write our own qualifications, pop them onto the regulatory body at Ofqual's site, have them regulated, have them funded, and anybody could do anything they like. Where the funding agencies have shifted over, I'd say the last 5 years to 6 years in particular, has been very much about looking at prioritisation, but actually use and whether they are market suitable as well. So we continually carry out something called a product review process, whereby myself and all of my colleagues that do the same role but for many, many different industries, we look at the uptake of them. Because if you've only got somebody, a qualification or unit or an award that's taking, I don't know, 10 learners a year, is this something that what industry wants and needs, you know? So we do have to balance that slightly as time progresses as well. But even if they're not fundable, there's still a market there, as we said, you know, for the full cost recovery, the adult learners, the employers who want to pay for different things in different ways, as almost like CPD as well. So we continually review what's popular, what are people using, what does industry need, and that's what really ultimately a really large piece of my role.
Yeah, it's a very complex thing, and it's a chicken and egg, isn't it? Because if there's no funding there, then you know, quite often adult and FE colleges won't run them because they're not can't get any money for them. Therefore, people don't do them. So it does take, I think, the small training provider, the private, really need to champion these and really need to get on board and actually make that switch between an accredited training, which, you know, it might be absolutely amazing, but doesn't have the assessment strategy attached to it, to actually put the assessment strategy and to find, you know, partners that they can work with to actually bring that to the table to keep these qualifications running. So then moving on from that, we then had the redevelopment of a lot of qualifications that became the technicals. So most this goes on in further education now, so we now have technical qualifications. So again, what we're learning is not really any different, and I think these have almost gone back to how it was in my day.
I feel, yes, the original way of learning and assessment, isn't it? Absolutely.
So how would you explain the technical qualification?
So the technical qualifications, again, I'm easily excited. In our industry, there's always so much change, but these for me were a really exciting change in that education. So the government decided, you know, for education, for moving forward, and I think this was, gosh, about 6-7 years ago, I want to say now, a good 6 years ago, that the driver or the fundamental shift was going to be that young people in particular, so 16 to 19-year-olds leaving school, would have 3 options. They'd have an option to do an apprenticeship, an A-level, or a technical type qualification. And that's the kind of the overall picture they wanted. Because at that time, as we've articulated ourselves this morning already, it was super complicated, and it still is slightly, but it really, really was complicated because the average employer was struggling to start to understand, you know, what's my learner coming to me with? If this is a level 2 beauty learner, they actually could have done an MVQ or a VRQ. They could have specialised in beauty, comp therapies, done a bit of makeup, general routes. You know, the list really did go on, didn't it? And that is still partly there, but this real driver was towards simplifying education, and also providing something that was industry relevant. So having a greater industry input, which really with the MVQs and the VRQs, because we were solely sort of reliant on the NOS, the National Occupational Standards, awarding organisations hadn't as such yet worked as directly with industry and employers. So this was pretty much when I started City and Guilds, actually within the role that, a similar role that I am in now. So the basis of the technical qualification is that, yes, of course, we looked at the guidelines that the government, the Department for Education provided. You know, it had to be a certain sizes, they had to have particular assessment methodology, they had to include certain elements, but a huge part of it was around employer involvement. And that didn't necessarily mean work placement. And I think we all got caught up on that a little bit to begin with, because myself coming from a further education college, I was very much, you know, the learners have to do work placement, work experience, those sorts of things. So what was employer involvement was slightly different. So from an awarding organisation perspective, this was about us developing a qualification with, yes, reference to the National Occupational Standards, but reaching out to our extensive industry advisory boards or industry connections to start to consult on a much greater level as to what they would like to see in it, what's new, what are the trends that are coming through, what are the gaps that you're seeing of therapists or hairdressers coming into industry, you know, where have things been missed. So the introduction to the T-level, about 4 years ago now, we saw the level 3 actually, so the technical diplomas came first. And the idea from the government was that actually they were going to start to switch off legacy style qualifications. So the shift that they wanted to see for further education was that learners were going to be undertaking these technical qualifications, and that the old VRQs and the MVQs would cease to be funded by the ESFA, because they wanted to be able to say, okay, these are dated to some point now. This is where we should be studying, so that the industry has a better understanding of what they're getting, I guess, at the same point as well.
That's really, really important, because I know for a very long time industry were very critical, and, you know, quite rightly so in some cases, of the learners that would be applying to them for the roles, and they felt that really they weren't adequately equipped for what was actually going on in industry. And I think this is, again, product and technicals causing us these problems, because they run so fast, and so the employer will go off and do training with products, and then of course, the people coming out of college were not equipped for all of those things. So that really was a massive change, and they've only really been going for what, two years?
I want to say 4 years now, actually. Yeah, it's been that long, I know. And I want to say definitely 3, but maybe it's even been 4 now. So we had the level 3 technical.
Last 2 years we've kind of wiped out. So maybe
I know, they don't count.
I'm really hopeful that, you know, as they get rolled out, more and more FE colleges actually use the technicals for their qualifications, we'll actually see an upskill. It'd be really interesting in the group, if anybody's got an experience of taking with a technical qualification rather than an old style MVQ or VRQ. It would be interesting to sort of get some feedback there.
And I think, Louise,
there's been just going to see whether there are any other. There are a few, actually. Yes, I'll come back to that later.
Louise, I was just going to add in, though, I think one of the biggest differences with the technical type qualifications that we do need to note is the assessment strategy. So the technical qualification, yes, it was an exciting time. It enabled us as awarding organisations to reach out and have more of an impact, almost, to shape them. So we started to see different awarding organisations developing them in slightly different ways. And we had to do something that was very much around seeking employer support, employer involvement. We actually had a duty to evidence that we'd done that to the Department for Education in order to have them approved, which we'd never done before. With the VRQs and the MVQs were very much, yes, we'd discussed with industry, but we didn't have to prove that we did it. So actually the impact that had then on the user was that there is an element of the technical qualification around employer involvement as well. So there's lots more, from what I can gather from our customers, there's lots more guest speaker events, and there's lots more, yes, there's still some work placement and things happening, but that's really shifted their mindset. But it must be noted, obviously, that I think, like we started to say, the assessment methodology has really shifted as well. And it's kind of shifted back 20 odd years, whereby and myself teaching, I was very much used to this unitized approach of either pass fail for an NVQ, or still a graded but a unitized approach to learning. And you would sort of so your teaching, learning, assessment throughout the academic year. Whereas with a technical qualification, it's very much about teaching and learning, sort of almost front loaded as such. So it's all about the learner exploring the subject matter, applying the skills really for a high percentage of the year. And then the way that it's assessed is through a synoptic assignment, which to you and I is very much like a trade test. So it's a full day trade test. Again, back probably how we started the conversation many, many moons ago. And they do a formal written exam, and there's different opportunities, there are different series to do that, but it really is about bringing the therapists together to get an overall grade or assessment, rather than doing an assessment one day on a red nail varnish, failing, doing it again and again and again the following days. This is very much about bringing the therapists together as if you'd expect to see them working in industry, really, whether that be hairdressing, barbering, and across many industries as well.
And I think for me, what's really changed the landscape of this qualification is the learner's understanding of what it is they are supposed to be doing.
Yes.
It's about getting them ready for this one crescendo. It's almost like on a performance, isn't it? And that's what you do when you go for a trade test in a salon. When you spend your first day, it's a performance. You have to get everything ready. You have to be rehearsed. You have to, be prepared. And this is really, I think, going to make a massive difference in our industry of upping the standards. But I think the other side of it is that those employers who are in the local community get the opportunity to tell the learners and tell the educators what they want from a person, so they can actually put their input and go and talk about their experiences and what it's like to be in a salon, and actually influence that whole training. And I know that when we've had the industry advisory board days, there have been some fabulous some really, really good employers that have shown what they've done to get involved with the training, and actually basically put their money where their mouth is, stop moaning, and get in there and actually make a difference.
You're totally right, Louise, because this has been their chance to have their say and to get involved. And we've had an abundance of feedback whereby, because the majority of our industry is made up of SMEs, small high street salons and those sorts of people that would usually take on the therapists and stylists. And we've seen a real increase in those employers going into the college or the training environment to help do mock testing, to do competition work. We've really seen an increase in competition work, because ultimately what the learners are looking to do is to really look and think to themselves, I'm preparing for almost like a job interview, because there's not a therapist or a hairdresser in the land who would just turn up and be given the job, from a one-to-one verbal interview. You have to do a trade test, don't you? So the technical qualification has really provided that additional, I suppose, support for them to mirror what's going to happen in industry. And like you say, they've had more of an opportunity to meet lots of different and varied types of employers along their journey as well.
I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about competitions. Of course, back in my day, we had a hair and beauty competition every single year. And I know that now a lot of colleges participate in the World Skills events, which is phenomenal. And we are champion of beauty, aren't we, the UK? But that sort of all disappeared with the MVQs, I think, with the, sort of making the pockets, so that you were assessed on this and then you didn't do it again. And of course what that meant was that learners would come to the end of their year having not done a nail enamel for maybe 8 months. And so,
and I don't know about you, Louise, we used to hear, oh, I've done my G5. I've done my short hair blow dry, or whatever it might be. And you used to think, oh my goodness, you know, actually, you're going to be doing this forevermore. So it took that away. And for me, as a teacher, as an assessor, as a head of a department or a curriculum manager, it was refreshing that this new style of qualification that came to the market meant that the learners had to continually maintain their skills. And that's what we all do now. You know, to be able to be a verified, you know, assessor, practitioner, or even to talk myself about education, I have to keep my hand in and understand, you know, continually how to apply all of those things that I've learned over the years.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of catching up to do, but I think we're on the right kind of level. But that wasn't enough for the government, was it? So they've
another idea.
That's not enough. So now the whole apprenticeship framework, that isn't a framework, has changed.
Yes.
And we have these things on the horizon called the T-Levels. So
yes.
let's just look at apprenticeships first, because they are out there and they are being used, and
yes.
they are, you know, they are fantastic. And I certainly, when I've been having conversations with people that maybe have come out of education and they're now back in industry, trying to encourage them to get involved with the apprenticeship. And in fact, I think on the 13th of February, so not this Saturday, but Saturday after, I've got Rochelle's joining us.
Oh, fantastic.
To talk about the endpoint assessment. And also I've got a fabulous salon owner educator that's actually got 4 salons down in the sort of the southwest area.
Oh, wow.
So she's going to come on and we're going to talk about sort of from the regulatory point, what is the endpoint assessment and how can people get involved with being an endpoint assessor, and from the salon owner's point of view, how actually it is a business that you can develop. Again, put your money where your mouth is, stop moaning about the quality and get involved and help these young people kind of develop in our industry. So apprenticeships.
Okay. So apprenticeships, again, exciting. And this, I think, again, do you know what, in the last 5 to 7 years, we have never seen this much change in education. So, you know, my greys are covered well, very well at the moment. But no, it's we've seen so much change, haven't we, over the last 5 to 7 years, and it really has been positive change. So the apprenticeship market, has completely turned itself on its head as well. So the government, as a real kind of short story, decided that what they were going to do is look at the apprenticeships, the work-based learning kind of model, and what they did is they formed things called trailblazer groups, employer groups. So I want to again say possibly about 4 or 5 years ago, it must be about a good 5 years ago, these trailblazer groups were formed, and they were full of educational specialists, experts, employers of lots of different sizes. So we have the hair professional steering group and we had the beauty, and actually in the very beginning they were combined, but anybody who has lived and breathed through hair and beauty combined, we know that, you know, that was quite short-lived before we split everyone. Very different personalities, very different.
Now actually got an offshoot of barbers, because barbers something really strong.
Strong
to be involved with us at all, do they?
Yeah, no. So you're totally right. We started off as hair and beauty combined, and over the years it's now split to hair, barbering, and beauty separately. So yes, these apprenticeship trailblazer groups were put together. With the chairs. So we had a wealth of employers, from Tony and Guy, Lee Stafford, to Men's Hairdressing Federation. Gosh, there were representatives really, really far and wide, which is fantastic. And their objective was to formulate a 2-pager, which was very tight, standard, an apprenticeship standard. So if an apprentice was coming to you to work in your salon or to train tomorrow, what would they look like? What would the skills and knowledge look like? Now, this has changed, as you can imagine, the way it actually comes about and the way these standards are formed. But the ultimate idea is that there's something called an apprenticeship standard. It's an option for across many industries as to whether there's a mandatory on-programme qualification, and there's something called an endpoint assessment. So for hair and beauty, you are sure all aware, and we're incredibly pleased to hear that there does remain to be a mandatory on-programme qualification for both the hair, the barbering, and the beauty, and the various different beauty routes. qualifications are incredibly important to our industries. We're very much seen that we want that almost that piece of paper or the digital credential, however it's but awarded, to show the journey and what's been achieved along the way. So that is done in pretty much a normal, it's very similar to an NVQ, competency-based sort of journey for on programme. The learner works towards something called a gateway point, whereby at gateway they've finished particular elements of or full mandatory qualifications. They've also finished and qualified or achieved, relevant functional skills in English and maths. So once they reach this gateway point, they're industry ready, they're work ready. And then what happens, which is what was the brand new thing sort of 4-5 years ago now, was something called an endpoint assessment, which needed to be conducted and carried out by an independent endpoint assessor. So again, this was something that as City and Guilds we'd not really ever done before. We'd been an awarding organisation for many, many moons, I think 142 years maybe now, but becoming an endpoint assessment organisation was quite new to us. So the hair professional standard came to light and was fully approved by IFATE in May 2017. So one of my jobs was to complete a submission, like an application as such, to join a register, and this register was for endpoint assessment organisations. So you will be familiar with, and people will start to see people who are awarding organisations who offer any qualifications that might be part of like an an on-programme journey, or we could become endpoint assessment organisations as well. So it's twofold. Standards, I would say, definitely and certainly have risen from doing this endpoint assessment. It's very similar to the technical actually qualification, whereby it's like doing a full trade test. Yeah. So the qualification remains to be unitized. So they have like a barbering, a shaving unit, a manicure unit, a facial unit, for example. But the endpoint assessment brings all of that together and it touches on each and every unit in some aspect. So for example, the existing hair professional EPA, the endpoint assessment, is about 5-ish hours long, and the learners demonstrate a number of and a variety of different skills on a number of different types of clients. For beauty therapy, again, it's a good 5 hours long, recommended to use, I think, at least 2 clients, say, and the learner will be seen doing a back massage, a facial element, a body electrical element, as well as other different bits and pieces. So yes, the apprenticeship world has really changed and shifted. The on-programme part is very similar for us to what we used to see in an NVQ, but the real change has been that endpoint assessment, and we do truly believe, along with the steering group, that that's what's had the shift in the level and the standard, because these learners are being, essentially assessed by an examiner to sort of provide that overall apprenticeship standard.
I think that's really important, because one of the criticisms that there were about the apprenticeship before is that there were a lot of statements that said things like "as per salon policy," and of course if your salon policy is a bit loose and a bit ropey, then you can kind of meet it very, very easily, and somebody then has got this qualification, they go to another salon and then they don't meet their salon policy. So I think having that external sort of level of what is acceptable and what isn't actually will stop any weaker salons from just sort of letting people go through. So it's fabulous. So again, another big tick for the industry. We're getting somewhere. Yeah. And then lastly, we've got this T-level on the horizon. So
the new party player.
So yeah, and it's sort of it's not there yet. So we can't really say exactly what it's going to be, but the concept is that it rivals the A level, isn't it? And not rivals, gives an alternative for those that actually want to use it as almost like a stepping stone to go on to university and have the points accredited. So it's in 2 parts, isn't it?
Yes, so the T-level is the next kind of full-time education bit, or a thing that's coming to the party. And actually, when you look back, actually there's been quite a journey. So if you think from the VRQ to the technical qualification, there was quite a shift. And now from the technical type qualification to the T-level, it's almost the next part of the jigsaw. So
about full-time, because I think this is a big question mark, because full-time when I left teaching in FE,
it's different.
about 16 hours a week, and then it went down very quickly to about 12. So that was called a full-time provision. With the T-level, are we talking about a normal school full-time?
Um, it's not
You know what that
quite.
is, or has that not been sort of even?
It's not been fully decided as yet, but there are different almost funding points which relate to different sizes of qualification. So typically it is a 2-year qualification that we're looking at for a T-level, and it includes something that has been written by something called like a root panel who look at outline content. So outline content has been written, has been consulted on, we've picked it apart, all of our industry advisory board members have picked it apart like yourself as well and started to look at, does this work? Yeah, doesn't it work? What does it look like? And the education departments have been really keen to try and mirror as much as possible what the new T-level will look like in terms of what the apprenticeship standards look like. So they're very much mapped towards those, so that you've got a very similar outcome for the learner at the end of their journey. There is going to be a difference, and there's something called threshold competence and almost competence. So obviously with somebody who is working in industry doing an apprenticeship type mode of study, they're work ready because they've been dealing with the angry client, the happy client, the bits that go wrong. Whereas obviously studying in a full-time education type mode, depending on the size, I think I would envisage that could be, and the ones we're seeing for other industries, the building industries, those sorts of things that have already started to have teaching, they're looking at a good sort of at least 4 days at college. And there's substantial elements of work placement, at least almost 3 months over the 2 years that are included. There's the English and maths elements, there's the digitalised elements, there's the sort of the enrichment skills that are included as well. But this outline content that was originally written includes something called occupational specialisms. So what it does enable us to do is to have students that will almost learn a core, which for those of us in the hair and beauty industry do naturally run across many of the hair, beauty, barbering sort of segments. Things like health and safety, core principles of behaviour in the workplace, dealing with clients, promotion activity, those sorts of things. But the occupational specialisms enable the learner to be able to then move into hair, beauty, barbering, sort of almost like pathways as such. It's very early days. There's currently a bidding process that's underway. So the Department for Education's objective is to have one awarding organisation who would almost win a contract with the institute to be able to develop these and to do the work behind the scenes. And the first rollout of these would be September 2023 that we'll start to see these come into play. Now, there's obviously lots and lots of discussion around, the whole 2-year programme situation. We've moved away from that actually in hair and beauty over the last 20 years. And also the fact that this is primarily for the 16 to 19-year-old learner. We've already talked earlier this morning, Louise, about the fact that for hair and beauty, we have many, many adult learners who come into our industry to retrain, upskill, or just have a complete shift or change of what they're doing. The full-time education model itself doesn't meet everybody's needs. So there's going to be alternatives. Do we know what those alternatives are going to be as yet? I'm not 100% sure whether there'll be our existing provision, whether there'll be new things again that will develop possibly outside of the T-level. That's all kind of at the moment to be worked out and to go through. But the vision is that the 16 to 19-year-old will come in to do this T-level type qualification over a 2-year period, and then there'll be an option for further education, possibly an apprenticeship or doing something later on once they've completed that.
So wonderful. So
a lot of information.
So hopefully that hasn't completely confused everybody, but I think it's actually very useful to kind of know the journey of where education and training is going, so that as training organisations, whether you are in the accredited arena or whether you're in the regulated arena, you've actually got some choice, and that you know what that choice is, what it looks like. And I think it's important to work out who are your learners and who do you want to teach and what do you want to teach. And I know that anybody out there that is inspired by the apprenticeship and the T-levels and the technicals, there's a lot of work probably going to come up, because those people that have got an educational background and, you know, maybe understand the whole building, the whole process rather than unitization. I think they're going to be quite sought after in education as people to go and champion the future. So thank you so much for giving us all of that information.
Thanks, Louise.
I have got one question here, which I do want to pick up because I just want to make sure that I've got the right take on it. So Sarah has asked about the technical depth of the NOS. And the fact that there isn't very much information on the anatomy and physiology side. And this was actually something that I picked up with Jane when I was doing the review of them. And we had a long conversation about that. And the answer was, that's not their job. Their job as the NOS is to say it needs to cover this anatomy and physiology of, and it's the awarding body's responsibility for then taking that up and creating the qualification, which scopes the range. That's the technical kind of term for it, isn't it? So that's why, and unfortunately we are going to be back into a situation which when we develop the RQF qualifications, so the progression, not the progression awards, but the ones we've got now, the vocationals, all awarding bodies took responsibility for writing some of the units, and then they were shared amongst us, so it was collaborative working, wasn't it? So it means that if you do a skincare and facial treatment at level 2 with VTCT, the content and what you learn, the scope of the anatomy and physiology will be exactly the same as City and Guilds. But moving forward, that's not going to be the case, and we're going to be back to how it was before 1990, where actually the qualification is the product that belongs to the awarding body, and whatever depth of knowledge and assessment that City and Guilds wants to put in theirs, or VTC wants to put in theirs, will be up to them. Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we are very much aware that the NOS, so the National Occupational Standards, are currently being reviewed and consulted on at lots of different levels. And we certainly always refer to them. We look at them and we look at what's been written. However, we obviously take it to the next level now. We have a responsibility and a duty as an awarding organisation to reach out to our employer, industry experts and contacts to then say, okay, what else? Is this what you want to see? Because that kind of gives us the basis of what we might start to deliver or might start to look at. But then it's about saying, okay, well, how far do we want to go? What's industry? What are the employers telling us? What are the gaps in learning, or what's new? What are you finding we need to deepen understanding around? So absolutely, there's a lot more emphasis on ownership and also industry and employer engagement and support as well.
Fabulous. So I don't think I've got any other questions for you. I'm just going to double check. There was a question.
Oh, sorry, go on, Louise.
So there was a question on the 14 to 16 exam and synoptic. But I think there should be enough information actually on the website, isn't there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we've gone through really like speedy, haven't we? So I've probably missed out so many things that people would want to know the nitty-gritty information about. But at City and Guilds, we have a phenomenal team of technical advisors. So the technical advisors are really there across all industries at City and Guilds to be able to help and guide customers, you know, new customers, existing customers, or people just want a little bit more advice or sort of need to understand a little bit further every step of the way. So Sarah Fioda is the hair and beauty technical advisor, and please do reach out to Louise, myself, and or Sarah. We can put you in contact with the right people, and they will be able to talk you through, you know, the finer detail of specific qualifications, assessment strategies, bits and pieces like that. You said if you've got some specific questions around specific exams, units, and those sorts of things as well. They are there ultimately to hold and host usually one-to-one meetings face-to-face and network events, but everything we can do remotely now as much as possible. And I think, Louise, that's a really good almost place to sort of end on that. You know, we can appreciate at City and Guilds, along with all of our colleagues at other awarding organisations and endpoint assessment organisations that we are working tirelessly and endlessly together collaboratively around these assessment mitigations, adaptations at the moment, fully across the sector and for all qualifications. Never did any of us anticipate something called COVID, furlough, you know, all of these new words that we're learning over the last sort of 12 months or so now. So obviously everything that we've discussed this morning is the ideal mode of study, assessment strategies, those sorts of things, and we're very much aware that currently, you know, we are in a real situation of turmoil whereby across the nations, across the world, we're having to work with the regulatory bodies and our colleagues and friends at other awarding organisations, as I say, to be able to put in place flexibilities. And it is not, I can assure you now, about making things easier for learners or apprentices to achieve qualifications. That is not the case. I'm a beauty therapist by heart, my hairdresser at heart. Colleagues, you know, that is not what we're about, and that's that we will continue to champion, not making things easier, but what we are about, and very much what we are doing, is looking at different ways to evidence. How else can we prove that this apprentice or this learner has met a particular standard, or is able to be awarded you know, a regulated qualification in these incredibly difficult times? So yeah, it's tricky, really, really tricky, but we're doing our best, and I can but assure you that it's, you know, we're working with all of the different bodies all of the time.
Fabulous. I'm going to stop the live stream now. There's been lots of messages to me privately just to say thank you, Emma. This has been really, really interesting and quite enlightening for some people as well, that they thought they knew it.
I'm not sure if I've got it, but I'm happy to come back again, Louise, if perhaps we've done, I mean, we've light touched, haven't we, on everything, you know, so we've probably missed out, obviously, so much detail. So if perhaps your group come back to say, I really want to understand more about the T-level, what is that, or the apprenticeship standards, or the adaptations, you know, anything like that at all. Obviously, we host a number of webinar series and sort of live chats and meetings, but if you'd like me to pop on again, we can do another pre-recorded or a Facebook Live when people would like. We can sort of make it a bit more specific.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.